Here in New Zealand, spring has finally started to spring, and I know we're going to get probably a month of really crap weather between now and Christmas, but fingers crossed we transition to spring and then hopefully some kind of summer, unlike we had in 2023. In recent news, the Dead Cow Gully Backyard Ultra has announced that they are going to have prize money at their race, which has produced some, let us say, controversy online about relative performances of men and women in backyard ultras versus more speed-based ultras. And I'm not going to touch on that, but the other topic they've introduced is that of drugs testing. Now, they recently announced that they're going to test the winner, the assist, and one random person. Now, that's quite interesting from a trail running perspective because it's not something that really happens an awful lot outside of events like Western States, where they supposedly test the top 10 in the men and the women's races, and also at UTMB. In theory, I know that there are other races out there that kind of say that they can test if they want to, but it does seem to be a very, very rare thing. Now, probably at this point, a few of you are saying, well, hold on, Gareth, you're not a bad runner, but what do you really know about drugs testing? And do you have any practical experience of it? So while most of you may be more familiar with me from my race series, like How to Train Like a Bastard for 4 Months and Still DNF Tarawera, before I got into this whole running thing, I competed for Wales and Great Britain at the sport of fullbore rifle shooting. And if you don't know what that looks like, this is me shooting on a range just outside Brisbane during the pre-event training for the 2018 Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. I represented Wales at 4 Commonwealth Games and Great Britain at 2 World Championships. And in the Gold Coast Games, I was lucky enough to win a silver medal with my partner Chris Watson in the pairs event. During that time, I got drugs tested 3 times, and I've been through anti-doping training 4 or 5 times between 2006 and I think it was beginning of 2018. So I'm reasonably familiar with the process and how it gets applied. The first thing we should probably talk about in this context is the concept that you as an athlete are entirely responsible for what goes into your body. It's a thing called strict liability. So if you pop positive on a test, it doesn't matter how it got there, you're going to get a ban. If you can demonstrate that it was probably accidental, then you might get a short ban of a few months, as recently happened to trail runner Ali Ostrander, for example. If this happens in relation to an event such as the Olympics, for the faster runners out there, there's a case history from a guy called Alan Baxter who won a bronze medal in skiing at the Utah Olympic Games, I think in 2002, the Winter Games. His bronze medal was taken away from him because he tested positive for a performance-enhancing drug that ended up coming from a Vicks inhaler that he used. In the UK, that brand did not contain any performance-enhancing drugs. However, unfortunately, he bought his in the US where it did, which is kind of important. So what we should probably talk about is how can you find out about what's on that list or not, because it's a fairly extensive list of several thousand compounds. Now there's a tool for that called Global Dro. Now the Global Dro website, pretty much any elite athlete will be aware of, or anyone who's done anti-doping training before. So let's go here. So either use Google or just go to www.globaldro.com. This site is the official way of communicating what is on the WADA list to athletes. And if you look, it's got Sports Integrity Australia, UK Anti-Doping, Drug Free Sport New Zealand, and USADA. Now the reason it has these different countries' flags on is because the same brand of medication may contain slightly different active ingredients in different countries. So if you were to pick a particular brand, you want to know what that contains, you've got to select which country you bought it in. So I've got a little bit of a cold, as you may be able to tell, and I live in New Zealand, so let's look at New Zealand, and I want to go athlete, I want to select athletics, and I want to know about Lemsip. And it's Lemsip Coltland Flu Day and Night. Let's have a look at that. And that's the brand that I've got. Fantastic, one result. Let's click on there. Brilliant. So I can see quite clearly from here that it's not prohibited in or out of competition. And then it goes to list the ingredients down below. So caffeine, in or out of competition, not prohibited. It did used to be on the list, but it was removed about 20 years ago from memory. Paracetamol, absolutely fine. And phenylephrine, absolutely fine. So I'm good. It also gives details about the search. Now this is useful in very odd edge cases where a particular medication was on a list or wasn't on a list and it changed, and you can actually provide these search details in any investigation should you turn up an adverse finding to say, yes, I looked at this thing and at the time I looked it up, it wasn't on the list, which may contribute towards your defence. Now, let's talk about medicinal cannabis, because someone asked a question about that on the Dead Cow Gully Ultras Instagram. So cannabis, let's click here. So out of competition, absolutely fine. In competition, prohibited. Okay, so if you take medicinal cannabis out of competition, that's quite clear. But the problem is you then need to leave it long enough that by the time you're actually in during the competition period, if you get tested, it's completely out of your system. And some of the tests they use are extremely, extremely precise and sensitive tests. So you might want to think about that. The alternative is there is a concept called a therapeutic use exemption, or TUE. And so let's say I'm on medicinal cannabis and I'm based in New Zealand and I want to see about getting a TUE. I will click here and this will take me to a governing body where it'll explain the process and tell me how to apply for one. I don't know about the TUE process because I've never applied for one and I don't know anyone who has. I'm therefore very, very cautious about talking through it with you because it's not something I've personally experienced. Now, on the other hand, the actual processing of drug testing I have, because I've been through it 3 times, so I can talk about that for a little bit. What will happen is you will get tagged for a test. In the case of the Dead Cow Gully Backyard Ultra, you've either won, you've been the assessed, or they've just literally picked you from the list of people and taken you aside. As this is being conducted under USADA, I fully expected to follow the same process that happened to me under USADA when I was in the Gold Coast Games in 2018. You will be approached by an official and they will say that you have been selected for a drugs test. They will present you some paperwork. Here's an example of mine from the Gold Coast Games. I strongly suggest you take a photo of that paperwork with your mobile phone. At this point, you should note that in this process, you have certain rights. You have the right that the process is executed according to the book. You have the right to have a person with you, usually your team manager, a family member. I would strongly suggest that you do take someone with you, someone that you trust and you can have involved to be kind of a witness for the process. Because if there are any irregularities, you've then got someone who can talk about that. The other thing is that you have the right to an appeal if your test result comes out positive. So at this point, they will take you to somewhere where you are going to go and pee in a pot. So this should be a private place where it's just you and the person who is administering the drug test, along with the person that you would like to have as a representative. You don't have to have a representative, but again, I suggest it's a good idea. You will be given a choice of a set of boxes that you can pick out at random that contain the testing apparatus. They shouldn't hand you a box, they should ask you which one you want to pick. The whole idea here is that it's very, very hard for there to be contamination, deliberate or otherwise, if you have had the chance to randomly pick which of the boxes you're going to use to house your sample. In that box, there will be 2 sample containers. These will be sealable, and once they're sealed, in theory, you can't get them open again without it being very, very evident that the tamper-proof seal has been broken. Now, this is interesting because this is actually how the Russians conducted their campaign of doping in previous Olympics, was they worked out how to open the tamper-proof seals and replace the samples inside. But my understanding is now that it's known how they achieved this, and so it would be very, very difficult to repeat that feat. So you will be then given a choice of which receptacle you want to pee in a sealed container. You will then go to somewhere where there is a bathroom or you can pee privately. You will be asked to take your clothing down to the level of your knees on your lower half and up above your waist, probably almost to nipple height or under your bra line if you're a woman. And then you will have to do a 360 entirely naked pretty much between your nipples and your knees in front of the person who's administering the test. You will then pee into the receptacle. They must see, and I quote, the stream of urine physically leave your body and enter the receptacle. Okay. At this point, you will put that aside, you will tidy yourself up and get sorted with what you want to do, and you will divide that sample between the two containers. Note that it is the athlete who should be handling the sample and not the person who is actually administering the test. Again, the idea here is that if you are the person handling the sample, you've had a chance to pick which container you're going to pee into and the sample storage jars. It's not like anyone can, pre-contaminate the equipment you're going to use. I would take photos of all of the equipment as you've used it. I would take photos of the sample bottles once you've peed into, divided the sample, and then sealed them up and put them in a sealed bag. You may be asked to sign some paperwork. This is again pretty standard, and kind of at this point you're pretty much done. You've given your sample, so you can tidy yourself up. You can leave remarks on the paperwork about how you felt the test went. Personally, I found that while it was a humiliating process to go through, the gentleman who administered the test, who was, I believe, a qualified doctor at the Gold Coast Games, was incredibly professional and straightforward with me and explained exactly what was going on as the test was administered. Cool. So at this point, you're kind of done. Frequently asked questions. How accurate the tests? They're very, very accurate, and they're very, very sensitive. They've been developed over quite a period of time. And if you think about it, one of the rights I talked about earlier is you have a right to appeal against a positive test result. And they will then at that point crack your B sample and then test that. And if both tests are positive, 99 times out of 100, you're in trouble. There's something in that sample, whether it's there deliberately or whether it's there accidentally. Do false positive tests happen? Yes, they do. There's an Australian athlete called Peter Bowl recently who tested positive for EPO. Then, as part of his appeal, all of that evidence was examined, and it was found that the actual testing for EPO was administered incorrectly. And basically they did what's called overloading the sample. They'd put too much sample in there, and it meant they couldn't really distinguish whether it was a positive test or not. Tests were rerun and it's negative, and he is, as far as I'm aware, been exonerated. What else? When someone says that they ate a burrito, is that credible? No, it really isn't. They doped, knowingly or unknowingly. What else? Yes. Supplements. Now, supplements are an interesting one, because if we go back to the principle of strict liability says if it's in your body, it's your fault that it's there. An awful lot of supplements are not made in controlled laboratory conditions, and they're contaminated, particularly bodybuilding supplements, and lots of people have popped positive tests through those. If that happens and you can prove it was from a contaminated supplement, you will probably still lose your medal. You will get a short ban of a few months, but you won't get like a 4-year ban, which you probably would. And the minimum seems to be about 4 years if you deliberately dope. What about batch tested supplements? Yes, but it's no guarantee. If supplements can be batch tested and sometimes the testing's not great, and you can still end up with a situation where it's contaminated and you're in trouble. Does WADA or USADA or any of the other bodies recommend supplements? No, they don't. The official guidance and all the training I've been to is you shouldn't take any kind of supplements. And certainly I didn't when I was competing in full-bore rifle shooting. I took nothing, to the point where I was paranoid about taking an aspirin for about 7 or 8 years. Supplements with guarantees. The guarantee is not worth the paper it is written on. If you go and read the guarantee, it will probably say something like it is limited to the price of the supplement you paid. So you might get $50 back if you're lucky. You can go and show that to WADA, and will they give you your medal back after you get disqualified from the Olympics because you had a contaminated supplement, even though it was batch tested and had a guarantee? No, they will laugh at you, and you will get a short ban. And every time you take a supplement, you are taking some kind of risk associated with that. What else? Finally, will I get told my test result? Mixed bag here. I have never been told the result of any of my 3 tests, so no news is good news. On the other hand, I had an online conversation with Camille Heron. She did get some of her test results back from USADA. So clearly it seems to vary by different governing bodies, but certainly, like I say, I was tested by ASADA in Australia, and I never got anything back about my test, so I kind of assume it's negative. We should probably talk about B samples. There is an ongoing program with WADA where they store samples for a very long time, and occasionally they will crack a bunch of B samples from people a long time after the fact, and they will retest those. And so occasionally you will find people who will suddenly get banned 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years out of the actual offence because new technology and more sensitive and accurate testing has been developed since then. Overall, I don't think it's anything for people to particularly worry about. Like I say, I got tested 3 times. I lived a fairly standard life. I wasn't a professional athlete. I was really on the kind of the outside edge of being an amateur. You know, if you do need to take a medication, you can probably go get a TUE, and there's documentation on how to do that. I didn't avoid stuff like paracetamol for the most part. I never really took ibuprofen anyway. So it's probably just, if you get tested, it's not the end of the world unless you know you've done something. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to randomly pop a positive test from everyday living. It seems really, really quite unlikely indeed. So just, if you get pulled for a test, go take your test. You will almost certainly be fine unless you've been doing something evidently naughty, in which case I don't have an awful lot of sympathy for you, frankly, knowing that you might get tested at an event like this. So I hope that's kind of been interesting and a little bit diverting for you. And I'm looking forward to a really nice spring of running. I'm in training for the Auckland Marathon in 5.5 weeks' time. Unfortunately, I got a cold at the weekend, so I didn't get my long run in. So I've kind of treated it as a little bit cut back week. And so hopefully I'm going to get back into it for a really solid final block leading up to race day in the final weekend of October. I hope your training is going really, really well. And if you are going to go and enter Dead Cow Gully Backyard Ultra, best of luck to you. Stay away from anything that could pop you on a positive test. Good luck to you all.